Hi everyone, today I want to speak about an announcement that was made by the Department of Justice in relation to the Crown Paints factory site in Coolock. The decision has been made by the Department of Justice that this site will not be used for international protection applicants. Now this follows a massive amount of public protests that took place last year in the strong working class community where people said they've had enough. People that have been left behind for years because of lack of basic services, lack of facilities in their communities, and as well a massive lack of local employment with a lot of factories, such as the Crown Paints factory site that employed a lot of people for many years in those areas closing down. And of course, people rose up and said enough was enough, despite the heavy-handedness of the Gardaí during that period as well. Now I covered in that Coolock protests in a number of videos last year, so I'll add a link in the comments below in relation to that, but it demonstrates the classism at stage in Ireland in terms of the mass immigration chaos. Now what's fascinating around this is that this site was owned by Townby. Now of course the man behind it is a guy called Paul Collins, and he has profited in 2024 to the tune of €23 million for providing international protection. Absolutely just extortionate amount of money. And the intention was to build 230 prefabs on this site and for 741 people. And of course the announcement was made by a Fianna Fáil politician, not surprising. And of course they're trying to claim some sort of credit on this, but fundamentally it's down to the ordinary people who stood up around what was going on in Coolock in terms of the lack of any democratic participation, involvement, consultation, and as well, as I've stated, the massive lack of basic social and public services in the working class community that is Coolock. But also the response from the Department of Justice stated that it was down to the planning and development of the site, that it wasn't suitable and perhaps it wasn't value for money. Of course it's not value for money, it's a money making racket, the whole immigration industry. And of course they said as well they wanted works required. Well, there was major works required because there was a lot of reports that it was an asbestos roof and loads of other issues at play with the Crown Paints site, which were all well flagged by local people, but their concerns were ignored and dismissed. That led to the public order unit descending on Coolock last year. Now of course what's happened as well in that area has been long-term deprivation, an area that's been completely forgotten about by the political establishment. And of course this statement also said due to the lack of access to services and welfare and the health and well-being of the residents. Isn't that remarkable? It's a never-ending money pit for this, but again, when it comes to ordinary people, they have to be begging to get looked after in Ireland in terms of what's happening to working class communities. And of course the response by the political representatives hasn't been really surprising, because they've come out and the Sinn Féin representative said that she welcomed the clarity, and this has gone on too long. But it's amazing that Sinn Féin never came down on the side of the people and actually have continually stood against ordinary people, much the same as the entire political establishment in terms of the Dáil representation that's actually facilitated this immigration chaos and benefited those at the top of society to the detriment of ordinary working class communities that they claim to represent. And also some other councillors have said that there hasn't been proper consultation. But of course they won't mention anything about the cheap labour, the lack of integration and all the rest of the issues because of mass immigration essentially, which is a globalist agenda. And it's also fascinating, this has come at the same time where it was reported that €1.2 billion this year will be spent on international protection applicants just for accommodation. And I'll mention all the other services they need to access, but this is just on accommodation. This is at the same time where there's no money for cost of living supports, and ordinary people are pushed to the pin of their collar because of sky high inflation, grocery prices and energy bills also. But of course there's no supports for ordinary people. There's plenty of money in this industry, and there's been 4.3 billion offered over since 2019. It's up 10 times since 2019. 1.2 billion is earmarked for international protection this year. That works out about €100 per night per person. Yeah, really, fundamentally, this is just outlandish waste of public money. But of course they claim it's international obligations. Well, what about the national obligations to the citizens of the state? And of course, 80% of those who claimed international protection have been rejected. And of course, we see all the PR exercises with the Georgian flights and all this sort of stuff going on. But of course, this is just public relations stunt. And I spoke in my previous video about what Starmer's been commenting on in terms of the UK getting tough, or so he says, on immigration, which of course is just rhetoric, but we'll wait and see how that develops and how it's going to involve Ireland in that regard. But of course the political establishment go around with their head in the sands in relation to this. And what's really important in terms of Coolock is that at the time there was comments made by the members of the political establishment who said that there'd be no veto in areas. That came from so-called opposition parties as well as government parties, and also said that there was a lot of thuggery at play and all this sort of stuff that's being peddled out by the political classes. And at the same time, a Fianna Fáil, now TD, Timmy Dooley, spoke about getting battle ready and sending the army into Coolock. Absolutely off the wall stuff. And he also spoke about having a water cannon. It's just outrageous that was pushed on working class communities at that time. And it was also said that they would have to has to be a show of strength by the state. Of course, put the water cannons on ordinary people for protesting due to lack of services and calling out what mass immigration essentially is, a race to the bottom for ordinary people in particular, and pushes down on ordinary people in their communities while making the richer in Irish society and billionaires richer, and many multi-millionaires like Collins and Townby out of making money from this immigration industry. And of course, some at the time said there was no consultation would have helped. Of course, consultation would have helped, because they always look down their noses at working class communities, much the same as many communities all around Ireland. And of course, they've also said that the community must now move on from this. This is now what it's all about. Nothing to see here. Let's move on and all be friends and forget about it. But generally, it's shown that it's a victory for ordinary working class people who even brought a High Court case, and the judge at the time, Holland at the time of the High Court, dismissed those claims, say they were so-called conspiracy theories and all this type of nonsense. But of course, this is stuff that was peddled by the establishment, while those members of the community pushed forward the Airhouse Convention, which essentially demanded proper public participation in the democratic decision-making process. But of course, there has been no public participation in the democratic decision-making process since they changed the laws back in 2023 to not require planning for any place that was to be used for international protection applicants. And of course, massive amounts of money has been transferred in it through that and through the Ukrainian temporary protection directive that comes through the European Union also, while making ordinary people poorer in society and ordinary people who are suffering because of these policies. But essentially, power has to be taken back to our communities and not be ceded anymore, like our sovereignty has been, by people like Martin Harris and the Lowry-led independents and Roderick O'Gorman before them as well, and much of the opposition as well, who are pushing the same agenda rather than stand up to take democracy and take sovereignty back to our communities, our towns and villages. And that's where power fundamentally comes from. It comes from the streets, it comes from our communities, and it comes from the grassroots up in our society. So it's up to us, each of us. If you have a platform, use whatever platform you have to get your message out. We all have a voice. Use your voice to speak about those issues, speak about it with your friends, speak about what's going on in society, because we need to put the needs of our citizens first, and that's in the context of a spiraling homeless disaster. There was never a big call out in terms of dealing with our homeless disaster in Ireland. Most recently, a report has come out that said it's at least 120 rough sleepers in the Dublin area, metropolitan area, which is absolutely just a tip of the iceberg in terms of the reality of it, because many parks on the outskirts of Dublin have many people sleeping, and up to 50% of them were without even tents. And when you consider a couple of years ago, 40 people died on the streets of Dublin, there was never a call out to deal with this humanitarian disaster that's been on our own doorstep because of a manufactured crisis created by the political establishments. Much the same now, they're trying to claim international obligations and being humanitarian in their response to what's going on. It's absolutely just nonsense. Don't fall for any of their spin, and use your voice to speak out to what's really going on and look at the facts presented. So people power, and ultimately it comes from below in Irish society, where it will change, and people need to get those conversations ramped up over the next period of time and stand up for a republic for the people, that puts the needs and interests of our first, where we have a dignified existence, people have a home, a decent health service, an education system, and they're not being ripped off every day of the week and being forced into homelessness and being forced out on the streets or forced to die on trolleys because of lack of investment and resources at the front line to support and help people live a dignified and a proper life that they should be able to lead in a republic that is exceptionally wealthy, where 2 billionaires have the same wealth as 50% of the population. Absolutely extreme in terms of the inequalities. But thanks a lot for the support with my videos, and really appreciate them. Please press subscribe as well to my YouTube channel. I'll add the links also to the previous videos I did last year on Coolock and the classism that's at display in Coolock. So victory for the people, but keep going and the people will overcome. Take care. Slán.